have to dissect all the way to the Milo Highway, but you can dissect. Now, when I look at this, it looks like it's relatively sharp, and so I want to flatten this. I'm not sure the rangers work so well on these models, but we could try. And again, it goes sideways there, and you can save these little chips of bone if you need them to work around your implants if you have a dehiscence defect. They're really nice grafts. We've used these in maxillary reconstructions. We use them in sinus lifts. The bone is pretty good. And so Paul's going to piece this. Again, real bone, that's a little bit easier than this bone is. Yeah, I need a straight amp piece with an acrylic, which I know you have in your center.
The other thing is that you have a mill text, and I would set that at 7. We're going to use a 3.7, so we'll round it up to a 4mm implant. You set this on 7. Then if you go to your midline, you know that your 7mm, that's the center of the other one. And if you go another 7, that's the center of the other one. So you can lay these out again with your mill text divider. Which you would have done on your cast before we started in order to be certain that we knew that we had enough room to get 5.
And my foot pedal for this one. Thank you. So now we have this burr on the handpiece, acrylic burr, whatever you want to call it, whatever. And again, this will get sloppy. Go ahead and retract the lid with this. It gets sloppy if you're using water to irrigate. You can use it through the drill, but you need to make this flat. I usually use the side of the drill, and I'm trying to make this like an aircraft carrier. Thank you. And I know where my metal framing is, so I only have to make that flat posterior to where the framing is. And again, the dimension I'm thinking about is how wide do I need to be to get my implant diameter so that it's fully encased. And you can see through this model, we're actually coming in on cancellous bone, because you can see that little yellow, maybe you can't see it, but there's a little stripe there, so you'll know when you're getting down to that cancellous bone, and you'll be able to, so you'll have a labial cortical plate and a lingual cortical plate. That's okay, as long as you lock the implants into the cortical plates. And just all the way posteriorly so that when my distal implant goes in, I know it's going to be flat. Now I just do this by side. I don't really necessarily, if Paul says I need to reduce it a centimeter, or Bill says reduce it a centimeter, I can do that. But otherwise I just run it until it gets flat.
Now, if this patient had teeth, I will have made a surgical guide for reduction. So, in this case, we know there's plenty of inner arch space, and we did our wax trying before we started, and we're just facilitating getting the implant placed. If there were teeth, and I anticipated that I needed to have space, I would have a reduction guide made, so that I would ground the teeth off on the model of the cast, built my wax up, made sure I had room for all my bars, and then I would have made a clear acrylic surgical guide so that once the tissue was reflected, you would know how much bone we're doing.
Okay, so I think that looks flat enough. As Paul said, we can measure the anterior posterior dimension. The implants we've decided to use in this case are 3.7. Again, some of that's based upon the thickness. So we need essentially about 5.5 millimeters transversely to be able to make that work. This is set on 7, so we have 5. So we're in pretty good stead. Now, if you let the flap go back, you'll see vertically how much we've reduced. Obviously, that won't work in the real model, but you can see that we've reduced at least 3-4 millimeters vertical, based upon where the flap goes back. Okay? All right. So now that we've got that done, now I need the round burr and a contra angle. And I'm going to start deciding where I'm going to place these implants. So if Paul wants 5 or Bill wants 5, then I'm going to start in the center and make my center bump. And again, this is based upon where I see the lingual, the genotubercles going back to the tongue, or the midline of the tongue, or we can have a maxillary denture and have the patient bite down and try to find the midline from that perspective. And this is going to go in the center of the ridge, And right in the middle, I've got a little dot there to mark it, but right in the middle, and I'll ask Paul if he thinks that's about middle, out there. Yes, no, maybe so. Is that middle? Sure. And again, making a dimple. You might tell me that's not in the middle, but I make a dimple there, and that's where one implant's going to be. Now, I typically go back and look at the metal foramen again, so if you could retract on the right side. There's my foramen. Retract hard, there you go. So I can see my foramen there, so I'm going to put my implant about a millimeter, sorry I jacked it out, a millimeter and a half away from that foramen vertically, so I'm going to put it right about here. Again, it's giving Paul some AP spread here. And I typically go to the contralateral side and do the same thing. You know that the middle foramen is right there, so my implant's going to be right there. Again, if this is too thin, I'll take a little more vertical away, and then I essentially have the distance between those dimples. So one here, and one here. So now I've got 5 marks. Now when I go back and look at this, it looks like this mark is a little closer to the center than this one, so I might cheat on this one a little bit and move it slightly distal, because I like to have it symmetric if I can. Okay, so there's my dimples. This one's falling off the press a little bit, so I make this one a little bit deeper. Alright, so now I've got 5 dimples. Now if I could have the 2 heavy there. So now I'm going to start drilling my implant. In the center, I usually start in the center. So if you could retract that for me, I'd appreciate it. And then from my perspective, what I have to do is get this organized labial-palatally, or labial-lingually, and mesial-distally so that it's straight. So this is where the eyes come to be important. So Bill, do you think that is where you like it, or do I need this? So I need to move this buffer. Now we're right in the center here, so he says mesial or distal. I can't, he'd have to say left or right. That's where you want it? Okay, so I'm just going to make, again, my straight move. And I'll go all the way to depth with this, 13 millimeters. And I'll pump it. And again, sometimes this stuff drills really hard, so you got to pump it, use irrigation. Okay, I've got a drill in this. So I make that first mark. That one.